Kind of a adjustment for me as we go to learn how to, so I don't knock anything over or try to write on something back there with this thing. But we're going to take a stab at it, and I'm trying to learn how that this really is probably good for me in the long run, because it's going to force me to be, I don't know, it's not really more prepared, but more organized in my preparation. Because in order for this to be up here, I have to go find it, select it, decide I need it, and put it in a file so Kathy can load it onto her magic machine back here, so it'll be there. I can't just go, oh, I want, and draw out something on the board on the last minute. So the spontaneity is a little lost somewhat, but probably the organization maybe improved. So we'll see how that all works out.
Coffee break.
Get coffee breaks. The one thing we won't have to do is none of you ladies will have to jump up and help some poor little girl find the restroom in the middle of Sunday school. So maybe that'll help take pressure off a little. So Pastor Juan and his folks had that challenge this morning. We are still in 1 Kings, believe it or not, and we're working our way through some issues with Jeroboam. And so, if you guys sit over there, I'm just warning you, you won't be able to see what I'm pointing at, because we're on camera over here, and so I have to use that one. So, sorry. I know some of you right-leaning folks, or is it left-leaning? Anyhow. Yeah, right in the spotlight there.
You got to do something about the glare off that.
Oh man, Maurice, you want to move back a little bit? Or, yeah, all you guys have to line up back there with Spurge. Okay. Anyway, we're working through Jeroboam right at the moment, and for those of you watching on the video, my apologies to any Hebrew speaker, because I heard a real Hebrew speaker pronounce both Jeroboam and Rehoboam in the way the Hebrew would say it, and I didn't anywhere close to the way I'm saying it. Not even close. I was, oh my goodness, is that how it really, it's got that rough breathing thing in the middle of it there, and all this, and I'm not even going to try it. So I'm using the anglicized thing, because I went to the Unger's Bible Dictionary, and that's how they pronounce it, so I'm going to have to stick with that. But anyway, you're looking at a map right there that we're familiar with in less pretty terms, and you'll notice that if you look closely, there's a city right there, and that spot right there is Shechem that we've talked about, where they went up. So they were here in Jerusalem, down here, and I like this slide because it put those two, the only cities it chose to put on this slide, and that's the place we've been focused this morning. So you can see that from Jerusalem, he had to go quite a ways up through there to get up to Shechem. And just so you can get a feel for Shechem, I actually have a slide. You remember that Shechem lies between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And you probably have wondered, so you know, we see Mount Adams and Mount Rainier and Mount Hood and think huge mountain. So it's a little different to look at, but this is what Shechem actually was right here. This is the present day city of Nablus. That's pronounced right, if you're in Israel or not, but this is a present day picture. And you have Mount Gerizim on this side and Mount Ebal, I believe, is on that side. I think that's right. So they had these really amazing little spot here. There's actually a valley that lies on to the north, or up through and towards actually the west, I guess is the way we're looking at it there. So we've got these two mountains. And you'll remember reading about the high places that we've talked about, and about, especially as we go to Jeroboam, how he set up his calf things in Bethel and in Dan. He's got these two places, and then other high places they set up. Well, one of them is here. And so on Mount Ebal, this is a recreation that an artist has done from excavation they've done on top of the mountain, and the actual place looks like that. On top of that mountain that's been excavated. And that was probably the ramp up onto it you can see there. And on top would have been the place where the sacrifices were made. And that was their place where they brought their burnt offerings and offered them on high places. So there you have it, the actual place. Now isn't that cool? You can go there. It's a lot better than my drawings. So this is kind of fun as I can find these things. I can actually take you there a little bit and let you see that those places are really there, real places that people built. And so here is where you can picture maybe a little bit Rehoboam and all his contingent coming up there and meeting with the nation to crown him king, so to speak, only to find out that they all left him, at least 10 out of the bunch. But before we charge ahead, I was trying to figure out how to put some connections together for Jeroboam and what he's doing. And we've talked a little bit about how he set his government up and everything. And that took me all the way back to Exodus. And you're going, oh no, not back to Exodus. But the problem I'm running into is that I cannot go through this passage and study these guys unless you know the connections that go all the way back to Exodus. And then sometimes you even have to look ahead and see things that are coming. And in going through this kind of the history part of the book of the kings and of the nation of Israel, we're basically going to have to study the whole Old Testament. You just can't make sense of it if you don't have some sense of the history of it. So it took me all the way back to Exodus, and Moses down as he's taken up on the mountain to get the Ten Commandments from God. And you know, remember, he is up there on the mountain in Exodus, and while he's been up there 40 days and 40 nights, and all of a sudden God comes to him and says, I hate to tell you this, Moses, but you have a problem. And the problem is, everybody thinks, oh my gosh, it's been 40 days, where is the old guy? You know, maybe he died up there or something. This Moses that brought us out here, and he dumped us out here in the wilderness and left us stranded out here. So if we go back, and I think it's Exodus, I want to say 32. My brain serves me right. See if I can take you there. Next is this 32. Listen to the people here, verse 1 of chapter 32. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, come make a god for us who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. We need a god. We need something to, I mean, we're stuck out here in the desert. Who's going to take care of us? And Aaron said to them, tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. Now, I have a real problem when I got to that, because he didn't say, bring me the gold coins, bring me your necklaces, bring me anything else. He said, you go and get the earrings out of the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. And then the rest of the story is they took off the rings which were in their ears, brought them to Aaron, and they fashioned it, made it into this molten calf. And I have not found yet, if any of you find a commentator or somebody that tells me why earrings. What is, the only one that I saw that said anything about it said they felt that this was something that was so close to them and precious and everything that Aaron had hoped maybe that it'd be too big a sacrifice and they wouldn't be, no, I'm not giving up my earring. And then was shocked when they all gave. I think there's something more to it. I think there's some connection between their faith or lack thereof and their choice of sacrificing that earring. I think it may have meant more. I mean, you look up earrings and unders and all it just describes them. It doesn't tell you, other than we know that if you were a servant of a Jewish person, you could go to the doorpost at the end of your time of service for your master when you were going to be released from your period that you sold yourself basically to. You could go, you stand next to the doorpost, you know, and they pierce it with an awl and put a ring in there, and that symbolized that you had willingly given yourself to serve that household for the rest of your life because you liked the job you had. So there's that one. That's the only one I could find that refers an earring to being anything more than ornamentation. But there's got to be something. So that's no extra charge.
They're very personal.
It is personal. Yeah. There's something, there's got to be something to do with that, about personal, or does it have to do with ears? Does it hear or don't hear? It just bugs me. Why? Okay, anyway, so if you find anything, let me know. And then it says he fashioned this calf, and that's the connection I want you to see, because watch when he gets it all done, he gets it made. And the other thing you always got to compare is, notice in verse 4 it says that he fashioned it, and in my translations with a graving tool. There's a little discussion over what that means, but basically they manufactured this thing is the importance of what those words are saying, that Aaron actually took and had it made. When Aaron later tells Moses how it arrived, this kind of speaks against that, because Moses gets told, well, they gave me their gold, I threw it in the fire, and there it was. It wasn't me. Anyway, of course, I've never told him that. Anyway, so they built this altar, and he says, tomorrow's your feast day, in verse 5. And everybody came, and they did this thing. And look at verse 7. Whoop. That's not the one I'm looking for. I passed right by it. Verse 4, it's the bottom half of the verse. I'm getting way ahead of myself. It must be the projector. He fashioned this with a graving tool, made it into a molten calf there, and they said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. I want you to remember that phrase, because you're going to see it again. We've actually seen it again. And I think it was deliberate and intentional that when Jeroboam gets together with his cronies and he says, how are we going to deal with this situation now that we've broken away from Jerusalem and Rehoboam and that king down there? How are we going to deal with things? He went back to this.
But don't you know the rest of the story?
Oh, sure. But does it mean anything to him? Not really. He's looking for a link. You can see what he's doing. He's looking for some kind of link that's in their history that happened, that everybody knows, because this would have been taught to every generation. They weren't always catching the intent of the message, but they were really good at, all young people had to be schooled in a certain way in the religious schools, and they knew this stuff. So everybody knows it. So you can go back and say, did you remember this? This is the God that brought you out of Egypt. This is it. It also has links because of the calf to the worship they would have seen in Egypt, which was the worship of the bull, and was part of the religious rites in Egypt. So they would have brought that with them to here, and from there to Jeroboam. So it's really interesting the connections that he's going to make here. So if we go back now to pick up Jeroboam, his dilemma he has. Yeah. Is it too dark back there to see? Is there a way to turn on the back half of the lights without having the one up here? We're trying to figure out how to make the video thing show up a little better because the lights tend to wash it out. There we go. Let's try that. Thank you. We'll see if that works any better. So if we go back to 1 Kings again and pick up where Jeroboam is trying to deal with his new situation. In verse 25, we've got him in Shechem, that we just looked at, in the hill country of Ephraim. And he built it up, and he made this his place of living. So I'll pop that up because we just got Linda didn't get to see Shechem. She wants to see Shechem.
Oh, yeah, I want to see Shechem.
It's right there on the map, and there it is, Nablus, in modern day Israel, right there between Gerizim and I'll bring this one did, Hebron. So we'll shoot out. Okay, so we are back here. He's now set up camp right there, and built the walls up, and he went out from there. He also built up this other city, Penuel. He's starting to reinforce things. In fact, the Hebrew commentator guy I listened to believes that he built essentially, well, not physically, but in what he's designing here, he's building a Berlin Wall between himself and Judah. He is trying to separate himself from Judah and Rehoboam and the other folks. So here's what he's after. And he says in his heart, you got to think about it, this is what he's thinking inside his head, the kingdom will return to the house of David. Why would he say that? Why would that be in there? I've got this kingdom, I've had all these people come and ask me to be king. He has had a landslide election, if you will, saying, we want you to be king. All these tribes came in, and he is sitting there thinking, they're going to go back to Rehoboam. Why would he say that? And it has to do with the comment you made there about, well, they know the rest of the story. He knows the rest of the story, doesn't he? He understands that there's one king, and in the prophecy that was made about him said, you can have these, but I am going to keep the line of David because of my promise to David. He knows that that's out there. And he says, if I don't do anything, they'll go back.
Also, the whole idea of the word remnant. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? He
There's
knows
a-
the remnant
There's a remnant
stays
there.
with
Yeah.
King David's line, so he may have it for his lifetime, but then he knows it's going to end.
Yeah, it might end, yeah. Even though he was promised this name, he's not going to be the name. And one of the commentators I was looking at points out the fact that he doesn't appear to want to take second place in anything. He wants to be top dog.
I think it's interesting that he knows his background and he believes it, and yet he deliberately chooses to go a different way.
Isn't that interesting?
Even and to use this
Yeah,
for his own benefit.
yeah. He knows
But
things,
it's a choice he's making.
and yet he doesn't. You know, it's like the people say that, well, you know God, and says, well, Satan knows Jesus, who he is, and Satan knows the Bible, and he understands it very well, but he chooses, has chosen not to believe what it says. He knows about it, he knows the history, this guy knows it, but he says it's not like, I know this is going to happen and God's ordained it and that's the way it's going to go. It's, I got to do something to stop that. I am going to change what God has said somehow. I don't know how that gets in our head, but he's, well, I know it says in there, but. So there's where he's at the but. Because he says, if this people go up to offer sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Oh, here, hey, will that picture show up? Did we get that one to work? I'm not sure if you can see that. Not Jerusalem, the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Cool. There it is. One artist rendition of it with the altar and a huge thing and this massive structure sitting up on the hill in Jerusalem. When they go back, as they are required to do, and they see this magnificent place and everything attached to it and what it reminds them of, guess what's going to happen? They're going to go, and they'll talk to their friends, and they'll see everybody there, and they'll remember that this is the place that reminds us of the presence of our God. And I can't have that happen. He says, I don't want that. When they go, the heart of this people will return to their Lord. This is really fascinating what's going on in his head. If they go back to the house of the Lord of Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even then to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. What makes him think that that would happen? Well, who already tried to kill him? Solomon. Remember, he had to run to Egypt and hide. And he's going, so we can't have this. So in verse 28, this is the really interesting part. Verse 28 says, so the king consulted and made 2 golden calves. So he pulled in on his advisors. Everybody he could get around him, his trusted advisors, religious advisors, financial advisors, political advisors, got them all in there and said, what are we going to do about this? We're going to lose, we got to build this nation, we got to build this wall between us and Jerusalem. How are we going to do that? And they said, here is the key. I can just see some religious guy going, I know what you're doing. And so he made these 2 golden calves, and he said to them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. It is way too far. Folks, you don't want to have to go down here. Behold, listen, your gods, O Israel, that brought you up from the land of Egypt. It's almost, with the exception that there's an S in there, it's almost a direct quote right out of Exodus. Wow. This guy's smart. Really clever. And you see why you don't want to go. It's not that God isn't there. It's not that this isn't the place to be. And the mercy seat isn't there. And the brazen altar. Did you catch why you don't need to go down there? It's too much for you. It's way too far, way too inconvenient.
He knew the background, but so did his people.
Oh yeah. Everybody knows.
Everybody knew that.
They all know what God said, that this is the place I'm going to put my name. In Jerusalem, in this place. And when he made that prayer, he said, when you turn towards this place, and he says this place, but what does he mean about this place? Is it just this real estate right here? He's talking about that, the presence of God, and particularly right there is the mercy seat. Why would you turn your thoughts when you find yourself defeated by an enemy, facing pestilence, facing famine, facing all these things that Solomon prays about? Why would you turn yourself to this little spot right there?
Well, God said that was where his presence was.
Okay, so his presence is there, but you've really messed up. You're going to walk into God's presence and get
That's where you find mercy and forgiveness.
ah, yeah. And this is where I digress again. Sorry. I just stumbled on this as I was in the process. If you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 28, the whole first half of the chapter is, if you will do my word and you will follow what I say, here are this huge bunch of blessings. Your crops will prosper, your animals will prosper, your families will prosper, and I'll build your cities and I'll run out the enemies and I'll do all these wonderful things. Everything's going to be great. And you get halfway through the chapter and guess what happens? It says, but if you don't, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and everything that Solomon prayed about is in there, and then some. This is what, and it gets down to the end, and he says, I am going to run you out of the place. You're going to want to go back to Egypt and sell yourself as a slave, and nobody will buy you. Nobody will want you. He says, I am going to just push you out of the land and destroy you. And it talks about what happens when their cities get surrounded, like Jerusalem was, and how they camped there and they starved them out. And it's graphic. Yeah, it just gives you goosebumps and chills thinking about what God's telling them. He just tells them all this terrible stuff. But the one thing that you don't find in that passage is what you find in Solomon. I thought it was really interesting. Solomon says, when all this stuff comes down and we go, oh God, we have sinned, and we turn to this spot right there, then forgive.
When you say God is telling them, okay, now you probably already covered this, but are you talking about verbally or just like us in prayer, we have to trust that God's going to lead us in the right way?
A lot of this he's told them in his word. Physically
Okay.
wrote it down, it's in the law. He says, here's my standard and here's what I expect. The interesting thing about it is, none of us, they never met the standard. We don't meet the standard. And one of the places that all of a sudden hit me when he's got this temple now that represents actually, and you don't know how much they totally understood it, what this right here meant. They understood the sacrifice once a year. I think David and a bunch of others understood this is not only now, this is looking ahead. This is the line of David fulfilled right there. And in Solomon's prayer, what you see is one who says, Lord, when we screw up and all these terrible things happen, the answer to that isn't that we somehow turn around and live perfect. The answer is, you turn and you pray towards that place. What are you going to say when you pray towards that place? Oh Lord, I have really screwed up because look what's happening in our country. I have messed up so bad. I have sinned. And what are you going to expect? And on what basis will you expect it when you turn to that place? It's based on a perfect sacrifice that is acceptable in that spot, in your place. You see what Solomon realized when he's saying that prayer? And that's why I'm torn. How much, how could he just keep going the way he did and never turn around till he died? But when he understood that early on in his prayer, he's talking about the cross. He's talking about a sacrifice that's so good. And you know, the tabernacle worship, how did you handle sin? You brought your animal and you brought it up to this place and you put your hand on the head of that animal and you said, Lord, I've done thus and such and I have sinned, and by doing that you transfer that sin down. It was slaughtered and burnt right there. Now it was acceptable because the once a year one that happened back here. And you had to physically go there and do that. Did you catch what Solomon said? And that's what's so interesting about this. In Solomon's prayer he said, when you're captive, the last one, let me just put my cheat sheet I was stuck in here. The very last one. When the people sin and they're captured by an enemy and carried away, hear their confession and give their captor compassion on them and maintain their cause when they turn toward this place and pray. Well, Daniel took that literally and he went to the window and looked towards Jerusalem out that window and prayed physically toward that direction. But how can you receive that forgiveness when the law requires you to go right there? Solomon said, wherever you are, you're captive and you realize that you're there because you have failed, you've sinned, and you turn to this place and you pray, and in faith you're heard. That is earth-shattering. You don't have to physically troop down to Jerusalem, and here is Jeroboam saying, oh, you don't have to physically troop down to Jerusalem. You come here to this calf. And God's already given them an answer that says, I'll take care of your sin where you're at if you'll confess and turn back to me and turn around and follow my direction. It's like he's poured grace out there, and these guys are going to put legalism back on their plate. It's just more convenient legalism.
It's controllable.
And controllable by Jeroboam, you bet. And he's going to control it. And the other thing that just blows me away, he builds this whole thing on convenience and comfort and what fits you, what's nice for you. It's too far for you to go down there. Here's your God. He put one in Bethel, down on the south end, one in Dan on the top end, and if you have a map handy there, kind of a little just so you got the picture, Bethel is right here, just barely out of Jerusalem, right on the border, kind of the northern border of Benjamin. So it's just right out of Jerusalem. The other one's Dan, which is up here just north of the Sea of Galilee, or Chinnereth. It's right up there, right on the northern end. So he's got both ends of the country covered. Whichever way you want to go, it's not too awful far. So it's funny, it's not very far from Jerusalem on this end. But we're getting that Berlin Wall up there. Keep you out of Jerusalem. So there it is. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. Well, they violated the first 2 commandments of the 10 commandments. No other gods before you. Do not worship these other places and these idols. So, you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind. Well, that's out the window. This is now the God. It's this golden calf thing. And then he made houses, here you go, on the high places. So we just looked at the high place. Up on top of the hill there, he made these other high places, make it convenient for you. It's easy. And he made priests from among all the people who were not of the sons of Levi. We talked about that last time. That is really key. We're not going to have the sons of Levi here in this place, because the sons of Levi have connections back to the temple in Jerusalem. And their loyalty is seen as being there and the connection to it. And I want people that are going to do what I want. I want them to worship what I can control and what keeps them in my power, in my kingdom, and builds up. Jeroboam's smart. He's a power-hungry guy, and he's smart.
My Bible says, and made priests of the lowest of the people.
We'll take anybody who is manipulated. You want to do it my way? Come on down. We'll make you a priest. That'll be dealt with later by God. So he's got this deal, and then in 32, we talked about this a little last time, you just got to put all these pieces together and see what this guy's doing is incredible. The people buy this. And he instituted a feast in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month, like the feast which is in Judah, only a different month. 1 month later, exactly the same feast. And then he goes up to the altar in Bethel, and he's sacrificing to the calves which he had made, and he stationed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. Did you get that? And he went up onto the altar which he had made in Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the months which he had devised in his own heart. And he instituted a feast for the sons of Israel, and went up to the altar to burn incense. He set it all up. He manufactured it. But yet, did you notice what it is? Why he was able to sell it so easily? It just gives me goosebumps.
I mean, just that whole idea of hero Israel, the Lord your God is one. You know, they're not even thinking about, he makes 2
You got a couple of them.
God.
We'll cover you.
And yet, you know, they have their catechism, you know, that they went through their religious training. So I keep trying to make a correlation between not knowing, so he was able to persuade them easily because they were ignorant of the, but I can't say that.
No, they weren't ignorant at all.
weren't.
But there was, boy, it played right into our human natures.
Sounds like a guy opening up strip malls along and then building churches with espresso bars. You know what I mean, too.
Not that there's anything wrong with espresso bars, but
No.
why do you put it in there? You know? Well, it's nice and convenient, and people like
But
it.
it's nothing to do with the temple, you know.
Yeah. And did you notice what they have? They have the form is there. It's just a different month, right? I mean, what's the problem? It's the same feast. He says it's like the feast they're familiar with. So he took what's familiar to them, what they know, and we'll just move it over here 1 month. And there's reason for it. You can justify it. Because they're up north. Their harvest is later. Always before, when it was the the time to bring down the first fruits and make that offering. Yours are still green. You live in Bickleton. That's everybody asked me in July. Well, what, you guys harvesting yet? Well, yeah, in Roosevelt. Bickleton? Well, they haven't handed out yet. Really? Well, no, it's 3,000 feet elevation. It thinks it's still winter. Trust me, last week it was winter up there. Man.
Who cares what the calendar says?
I still have the goosebumps to prove it. Boy. So folks bought that easily. Oh, yeah, we want this to fit with our harvest time. It's more convenient, makes more sense for us, and it's the same feast we're familiar with. And yeah, and these calves, and there's a connection on our history. We just kind of lost that somewhere along the line. And so we can quote some Bible verses and we can throw them in there and justify it. And Jeroboam's just got to move right over where he wants them. Because now they'll worship here, they'll worship our time. They won't be going down the month before to Jerusalem. Even the holdouts are saying, well, gosh, well, hey, we can do the same thing, it's just a different month. You see what he's doing with them? It's so close. He didn't take this vast, huge departure, and in fact, it is some time before the Ashraim and the Baalim and all these other idols start moving into Israel. They move into Judah way before, and are established in Judah way before they're established in Israel.
Seems like it's more important to the people. I keep looking at the people. And Jeroboam does what Jeroboam does. But
Right.
I still can't understand how the people could have followed this, but I guess it's just because he's stuck in tradition, quote unquote. They thought it's like they had lost the meaning of what they were doing. So that they just didn't want change,
We've got motions, we've got things we're familiar, and it's comfortable, it's convenient, we don't have to travel so far, it's stuff we like.
But I've talked to people who it's more important to be spiritual than to identify what it is they're worshiping.
And you feel good, you go to the services and have a great time. You have the feast days.
Part of it is the fact that it took so long to take effect. If you go into a place and you say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this, this, and this, and we're going to do it by Thursday.
Yeah.
He took the time and did it over months.
Yeah.
There was one thing and then there was something else, and then he interjected the different feelings. Oh, well, you don't have to go so far.
Yeah.
And things that were going on with these people are probably similar to what we experience today. You have a lot going on, and gee, if I have to go to Seattle, why not do it in Yakima?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Is easy to slide under,
Just to
and you don't think
move
about
you
that.
along.
Yeah.
So you remember what I told you about survey, that engineers, if any of you have been around here when they've leveled a new field, and it's all humpy bumpy, and they've picked one spot based on usually the survey markers that are out there. They're fixed points, and you come up with one fixed point and say, here it is, right here. And everything else in that field is measured off of this point that I know where it is. And so now when that machine goes across and it's got its little laser deal, boy, it scoops up dirt or dumps out dirt based on this point right here. But the problem will come when you have to, for some reason, you decide to move this point. If I did, okay, on Monday I'm going to use this point, and now Tuesday or Thursday I'll go over here. Okay, I think maybe today I'll use this one. Well, if it's 6 inches higher or lower, what happens to your field? All of a sudden the whole thing's off. And by the time you're done, you don't know whether that field is upside down, backwards. You'll have water running every which way out there. So you have to have that fixed point. And the problem that they have, that the nation of Israel has at this point, those 10 tribes, is that when everybody starts pulling out, they say, we don't like this, they all went down to Judah. When the Levites got tossed out and they all went down to Jerusalem to be with the folks that were still there, when all that happened, he removed the fixed point. And he moved himself into the new fixed point and said, this is truth. And so now they've got nothing to measure from, and once you start moving, and like he said, he just did it in these little baby steps. This didn't happen where he just took a big announcement today. Today's the day we're changing the world. He took what they knew, it was familiar, and then he just moved it over a half an inch, and another half, and another half. And you just see the nation moving away from the Lord a half inch at a time.
People not even realizing they were being manipulated.
They totally, it was so convenient, and so nice, and so comfortable. What's the problem? Where's the worshiping? And they don't realize they turned their back on God and walked away.
They made the choice.
They made a choice and they managed to fool themselves into thinking they hadn't. And that's just what happens to us. It's the same thing going on in the USA today. We've removed it where we go and say, wait a minute, I heard this guy on TV, or I read this book, or I attended this church. Man, it made me feel so good. And it made sense, and it was logical, and oh, what an argument he had. And you say, what did it say about, what the Scripture says? How does it compare to what the ancient writers have said and what the Apostle Paul said? Well, what about this passage here? Well, they quoted some Scripture, and it looked like a church. They had lattes. What more could you want? And so all of a sudden, the reference point has been moved, and it all feels like normal, and we're all fine with it, and we've walked away from the truth. And it's so dangerous because this is so boring. I mean, it's another hammering away on the same old, the Sunday school teacher in that church cannot get through 1 Kings because he keeps going back to Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus. I mean, it's terrible. So you can see it happening right around us as people move the markers. What was right 10 years ago is now wrong. You're going, how do we get there? Well, we moved our survey point. It went away, and now we're over here. So this is a new normal.
It keeps moving.
What's that?
It keeps moving.
And it keeps moving. And it keeps moving because when you remove a fixed, never-changing... Why does our country have a constitution? Do you know why that is? It's the fixed point, isn't it? And why are there so many arguments? Why is the Supreme Court always up there battling out over what's constitutional? Because that's the fixed point. And if you want something different than what the fixed point is, you've got to find some way to convince everybody that it isn't the fixed point anymore. It's just, nothing's changed. So the battles we're in today are the same battles that Jeroboam was working on. And I just wanted you to get a little glimpse of that this is what he's doing, this is what he's instituted, and he's going to take the nation with him. The amazing thing about it, when we get into this, what you will see from a sin standpoint, Judah has it in spades over these guys. From an overt, what we would call the idol worship, the stuff on the high hills, the Asherim, the worshiping Baal and sacrificing. We got kings that are taking their children out and sacrificing them to Moloch. Terrible stuff. Just horrifying. And yet this is the nation that turns its back and walks away from God. And they, in some ways, will almost look more righteous or dignified than Judah. That's a mess. But the heart is different here versus what you see in Judah. And this is the one that in Jeremiah we read about. God says, I divorced them and sent them away. Why? Because they walked away from him and never came back. It just breaks your heart to see what happens to this nation. We've got to stop because folks are going to want to come in here and there's a church service or something happening. So we better quit for today. Father, we thank you for our time this morning, for this study that forces us to go through your entire Bible, really looking at your truth. Pray that you would help us not to be lost in it, not to be confused by it, but to see how you have shown for us the condition of our own hearts through looking at these individuals from your word. pray, Father, it would be a warning to us to be sure that we keep our fixed point fixed, that we understand what our Bibles say, we understand what you expect of us, and most of all, what you provided for us in your Son. That we can turn our hearts to Him and to the sacrifice He made and find our forgiveness in that. And that we would then have hearts that desire to be directed by Him, by your Holy Spirit, to live a life that reflects your values and your choices for us. Father, we thank you for our time together this morning in Jesus' name.